So this is all about aggregate supply. So what is aggregate supply? It's a scheduler curve showing the level of real domestic output that all firms will produce at each price level. Basically, the total supply of an economy. So we're looking at aggregate demand. We talked about it's everybody's demand for all of the products. So aggregate supply is what's the total supply of the entire American economy, or whatever economy we're talking about. So describing the shape of the aggregate supply curve, the AS curve features three ranges. There's two ways we can view the aggregate supply curve. The other is what you're more familiar with, which would just simply be the upward sloping supply curve. But when we talk about fiscal and monetary policy, it's going to be easier to use this three range model instead of using the simpler model, just the upward sloping. Each range in the aggregate supply curve is related to a phase of the business cycle. We have recession, where price level is generally pretty low and real GDP is low. And then we'll eventually get to the intermediate range, which then sees real GDP start to increase, as well as price level starts to go up. And then we hit to the vertical stage where we see no increase in real GDP. We only then see an increase in the price level. So the horizontal range. Many resources are still unemployed. The economy may be in recession or depression, or the economy is in some way underperforming. And so it has large amounts of unused machinery, equipment, and unemployed workers in this stage. There is no change in price level, so no inflation during a recession, because as you can imagine, the money wheel is starting to slow down. Things aren't flowing through the economy like they should, so price level's not going to increase. Real GDP is low, so we're at the low end of the spectrum on the x-axis when we get back to it. The intermediate range sees an expansion of real output, but it is now accompanied by a rising price level. So economy reaches potential output. This is indicative of the expansion phase. This is where we want to be. We'll introduce the idea of potential output later on, but it's going to intersect in this intermediate range. Lastly, we have the vertical range. If aggregate supply continues to increase into this range, the only change will be in price level. So the economy is going really well, the money wheel is flowing very quickly, and so prices start to rise, but we're not really producing anything more. So real GDP is not. There's no additional real output can occur since the economy is already operating at or beyond its full capacity. So this is indicative of the peak state of the business cycle in this vertical range. So the business cycle and the AS curve. So we're in a recession here at AD1. We're starting to recover out of recession like we were in 2011, 2012, 2013. And so we continue that recovery into expansion, pretty much where we're at now in 2015. Economy's in a pretty good place. And if the economy expands too quickly coming out of the recession, what could happen is we notice that we're in this vertical phase where we're not actually going to be producing more output. Real GDP is not going to be increasing, but the more aggregate demand increases on this, so as it continues to rise, we're going to notice no rise in real GDP, only rises in the price level. So what causes AS to shift? Just like the aggregate demand curve, we're going to have to shift aggregate supply, and there's three reasons, and the acronym is LIT. We have the legal institutional environment, so business taxes, subsidies, government regulations allow businesses to produce more, so like less taxes, more subsidies, less regulation, or for businesses to produce less, so they're going to increase taxes on businesses. If input prices go up, things like wages and gasoline, so if wages go up, you have to fire workers, which means you produce less, and so in total, the aggregate supply would decrease to the left. Or any sort of productivity. Technology improves capital, be it physical or human. Any sort of way that we can produce more or less for whatever reason. So in summary, kind of pause the video here, and then I'll go over the answers here in a little bit. But pause the video here and try to fill out the answers to these questions. So go ahead and hit pause now if you haven't already. So the AS curve has three ranges, the horizontal, intermediate, vertical. So we have recession, expansion. Each range is phase of the business cycle. And the EAS will shift for 3 reasons. Legal institutional environment, I'm just going to abbreviate. We have prices, and we have productivity. And that's what you need to know about the aggregate supply curve on its own.